Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on this webinar on foreign investment in Indonesian agriculture. I'm Helen Brown, and I'm the Managing Director of Business Asia, talking to you from Melbourne, Australia, where we're going to conduct this webinar for you, but with a cast from many different parts of the region, and I'll introduce them to you very shortly. It's great to have you join us for this conversation. This is a report that work started on in, 2019, early 2019, it was decided to have a look at this question. And of course, because of the coronavirus pandemic, things were delayed a little bit. So it's with great pleasure that we can bring it to you today in collaboration with the Centre for Indonesian Policy Studies, or CIPS. And we'll find out a little bit more about the work of CIPS in a moment. Now, this is a very interesting report because it raises many of the issues that we hear being discussed a lot, in those places where business talks about what's going on in Indonesia and it's such a huge market. Why am I having trouble there? Or what are the blockers? And it seeks to delve into some of those particular questions that are around and present some hard evidence about what is actually happening when it comes to foreign investment in Indonesian agriculture, particularly looking at the equation from the Australia into Indonesia side. There would seem, of course, many possibilities to take Australian know-how and investment into a country like Indonesia, which aspires to grow its food industry, to grow its skill set, to grow its agricultural productivity. And yet, why is it not attracting investment from Australia? Why are these two countries not working together more on some very important global issues around food production, sustainability, and security? Of course, we can't delve into all of those things in the next hour, but we'll do our best to go through some of those questions that are around. You may not know that foreign direct investment in Indonesian agriculture is 3 to 7% of total foreign investment into the country. And as you know, the Indonesian government has been doing a bit to improve foreign investment and encourage it. We've also seen some trade agreements lately, the CIPS between Indonesia and Australia, or economic agreement as it's called, and RCEP is also coming into play. However, interestingly, little attention has been paid to foreign direct investment in agriculture specifically. And this report found that there were those impediments that we know about: land issues, infrastructure, food trade policy, but also looked at regulatory uncertainty and the impact it had, and the role of state-owned enterprises. So we're going to hear from the lead researcher about some of those issues. Also, I want to make sure that in this session, we touch on some of the possible solutions to this to try and budge that dial a bit. For our measure, for Business Asia's measure, we want to thank CIPS for the opportunity to work with them. We are interested in cultural capability. That's when a company goes into another country, and our big push is for the people who go into another country to learn about that culture and understand how to adjust to it for a better outcome, not just for trade reasons, but for the relationship as well. So it was a delight to work with CIPS on this, because that is obviously part of the equation. How well placed is Australian business to culturally go into a country like Indonesia? How valuable is it? I'd also like to thank the Australian industry groups and businesses that took part in the surveys, in the interviews. The insight has been fantastic and helped us pull together a great report. Before we go into the report though, I thought it would be really helpful if we learned a bit more about CIPS and the work that it does in the agriculture and food policy space in Indonesia. And I'd like you to meet Rainer Heffers, who's the co-founder and executive director. He guides CIPS institutional development and supervises its research and communication efforts. He's also a founder and managing director of consulting firm CIPS Solutions and a senior fellow of the Atlas Network. So he has deep experience in international business and policy. He's also a dear friend and someone I miss having coffees with when I get when I'm in Jakarta and when I can get back to it eventually, I hope. Rainer Heffers, welcome to this webinar, and please tell us a bit about the work of CIPS in Indonesia.
Thank you, Helen, and likewise. Can't wait for us to have a coffee again in person together. Let me introduce CIPS, or the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, a bit. I want to say a few words in general about the organization, and then indeed go more into the area of food security and agriculture, which was one of our key work areas. First of all, I'd like to, for those in the group, I've met several people in this attendance of this webinar. It's nice that you're able to join today, and I really hope that with the others we can get in contact through this webinar, maintain contact later. It will be great. But for those of you who are not so familiar with the concept of a think tank, because we refer to ourselves as a think tank, it is really a research center that is independent. We're not associated with a university or with any government. We are an independent group that does research in order to really influence policy making. So policy advocacy is very high on our agenda because we want to make things formulate things in a practical way. You'll see that in the report. We use academic standards, but we write in a way that is also applicable for and understandable by generalists like parliamentarians and certain people in the administration. So that's our key approach. In terms of our perspective, the angle by which we proceed is we believe government has a very important role to play in setting the regulatory framework. However, government has its own limitations, as it's normal in every country. So there may be enforcement issues, there may be other shortcomings. So CIPS puts a strong focus on the contributions of the private sector. What is needed from the private sector, what facilitates the engagement of the private sector, where are areas to cooperate with the government, what is possible in order to help Indonesia grow and prosper from the private sector participation. The three main areas that we are working in is indeed food security and agriculture. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but we have two other ones. One is education policies, because that's obviously a key challenge for the country, and we're trying to contribute solutions again from a private sector perspective. And thirdly, what we call economic opportunities or community livelihoods. So areas that really affect the poor, the vulnerable segments of society, and how they can actually help escape poverty through micro-enterprises, through their own initiative on a grassroots level, which by now the digital economy obviously is one of the main facilitating factors. So that's another area that we're quite busy in. In general, we're doing quite well. So last year we had 135,000 downloads of our policy papers. And they are always in Indonesian and in English. So that number shows that there's quite an interest in our work. We have very good relationships with several government agencies on the ministries of trade or agriculture or others. However, we remain independent. That's very important to us. So our research is not influenced by any particular interest group. And last year, we were proud that we won a global recognition with the so-called Templeton Freedom Award, which is basically the highest award you can win in the think tank scene that advocates in favor of open markets and private sector initiative. Now, let me get a little bit more specific into food security and agriculture. So in that area, we're really trying to advocate for two things. One is we need to open up the market for imports and exports. This is crucial because we need to import technology, but we also need to import actual commodities. This is necessary to stabilize food security in the country. So that's a perspective that's not necessarily shared by most other stakeholders in the country, but we're arguing that trade must be part of food security. And besides trade, we also argue in favor of productivity growth, which is also necessary so that farmers are able to access technologies. They are able to actually intensify their production, so we can reduce the extensive agriculture that we have at the moment, which comes at the expense of natural resources. So these two angles is what we highlight. And then we have papers focusing on specific commodities like rice, poultry, corn, beef, etc., or on inputs like we have papers on seeds, fertilizer issues, etc., all with a regulatory perspective. So where is government regulation helping, and where is government regulation hindering the process of productivity growth and food security? Besides that, we are launching now food dossiers. These are short papers that are focusing on one specific commodity, food commodity, in which every year we will publish the production levels, the productivity growth, the basic statistics, because that's a problem in Indonesia. It's very hard to find reliable statistics. So we do the job for everyone, and we are summarizing these statistics, and we're looking at the regulatory updates every year in our regulatory database, which can be accessed by those who are subscribing to our food dossier. So we are going to have them on corn, we're going to have them on soybeans, sugar, rice, and several other food commodities, garlic, etc. So if you're interested, please contact me. These are things that we produce with the help of our researchers. One of our researchers here is our Dr. Doni Pasaribu, who is the lead researcher of this particular study here. But we also have senior fellows from the National Statistics Bureau of Indonesia and from the Ministry of Planning. So we have competent people helping us with these dossiers. And finally, we are now embarking on a 3-year program, which we call a roadmap to the modernization of Indonesia's agriculture. So we're looking at a comprehensive way, what is necessary to bring Indonesia's agriculture up to speed for the 21st century. And that involves regulatory reforms in the areas of specific food commodities, import-export restrictions, but also obviously food systems management, natural resource management, seeds and fertilizers again, farmers trainings, etc., land reform. There are so many areas that matter, and we're trying to bring them all together in one comprehensive analysis that helps policymakers in Indonesia to make the informed decisions in a complex environment. So these are the things that we are doing in the area of food security and agriculture that I wanted to share with you today. What we are presenting in this particular webinar is the study on Australian FDI in Indonesia's agriculture. Helen has already introduced the subject, so it's indeed a core concern for us that we see technology growth as one core aspect that is needed for Indonesia's agriculture to modernize. And we want to explore any option that we have to get foreign investment into domestic agriculture where possible. Big thank you to Business Asia and Helen for the cooperation. It's been a great pleasure up to now. We're still in this together. And again, thank you to the participants and for all the businesses that have participated in the survey. It's really helpful that you shared your views, your opinions, and also some data so that we were able to put this report together. Thank you, and back to you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Raina, for that introduction and explanation. That's put us all in the picture and some of the great work that you're doing. Okay, well, let's now go to our panelists, and they're going to give a brief introduction of who they are and their subject area interest. And then we're going to essentially have a Q&A with them, and that will go for 10 minutes at the start, because I'm really keen to get your questions in the conversation to make sure that you also get your questions answered as well in this time. Let me introduce our 2 panelists now. First, as you heard, Doni Pasaribu is an associate researcher at CIPS, and he was the lead researcher on this report. We have put the link to the report in the chat if you'd like to access it while we're talking. You'd also have it in the invite that went out to you. If you'd like to have a quick look at it now, it's in there. And it's been great to work with Doni on this, as you can see. He does a lot of work around economics and trade. So he'll be joining us in a moment. And our second panelist is Brett Antonio, who is the Managing Director of Beck Feed Solutions. Now, Doni is based in Canberra. Brett Antonio is joining us from Brisbane. Raina was in Jakarta and I'm in Melbourne. So, you know, the great thing about the coronavirus is that we've learnt we can do this together Brett, sorry to diverge, Managing Director of Beck Feed Solutions. Now, he's been in this role since 2009 and was involved in the move to Indonesia in 2012. And as you can imagine, has had a lot of experience in going into Indonesia, into the agricultural sector, having a look at what the market is, how does that align with the business that he has in Australia, and then making a very big decision to go in and not just sell product in the country, but invest in it as well. So his insight is going to be fantastic. So let's bring our two panelists into the room, so to speak. And I'll start with Donnie Pasaribu. Donnie, lovely to have you here, and thanks for taking the time. Can you tell me in your words why you think it was important that CIPS conducted this study?
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Helen. I think it's better if I show my slides, if that's okay. So this is very much related to what Rainer has mentioned earlier. FDI in agriculture is very important, especially when we think about Indonesian position in terms of food affordability and food security. So here's a graph showing the changes in food prices in Indonesia. The blue represent changes in food prices. It's nearly tripled in the last 10, 15 years, right? Compared to every other goods in the economy, which not even double. So food prices has been increasing much, much faster than everything else. And if you compare it to several other countries in the region, like Malaysia, Singapore, or even Vietnam and Philippines, Indonesia, food prices has been increasing at a much, much faster rate. And we see that as a big problem. And FDI, the foreign direct investment, a lot of studies have shown that it can bring new technologies, managerial capacities, knowledge, connection to the global market, and so on. And that is why we think it is important to see why it hasn't been big in Indonesia. So you mentioned earlier about FDI in agriculture is only 3 to 7% of total FDI realization, right? But that is including investment in palm oil. And that is nearly everything in Indonesian agriculture investment. Because, for example, here in its peak in 2014, FDI in palm oil alone was more than 40 times the rest of the agriculture sector combined. So all the other sectors that you can think of, they're very, very small investment, and they need this FDI to increase the productivity, increase the access to the global market and other capacities. We write this report to identify issues specifically in Indonesian agriculture beyond other metrics that are already available. And well, we know some of these issues, as you mentioned earlier, are also applicable in other sectors like infrastructure or regulations. Some of them are quite unique to the agriculture sector. And our policy recommendations, while it is mainly aimed at policymakers, the recommendations, but they are also relevant to businesses. Yes, that answers your questions.
Yeah, that's great. What a well-prepared answer. You are a researcher. But, raised some really good points there. And I think we could bring Brett Antonio into the conversation because, Donnie, you said that you looked at the rise in food prices in Indonesia. And Brett Antonio, your company, of course, did a lot of research before it went into market. And you were looking at the demand for food and especially in the animal industries, which is what you're involved with. What sort of trends were you seeing, I guess, around consumption and maybe price as well?
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the webinar with some esteemed colleagues here from the industry and researchers. Quite proud to present today, actually, because it's been a bit of a journey for us at BEC. We set up there in 2012. I shared some of those metrics with Helen before I jumped on this webinar, but it was very compelling for us at the time, looking at there was a whole lot of range of factors why you'd want to develop a business case to invest in an overseas country. I guess from where we sat, we could see that the Indonesian population growth is obviously attractive. I mean, the numbers at the time were 260 to 280 million. I'm not sure people knew exactly the number, but whatever the case, it was at least 10 times the Australian population. We saw the large growth in food consumption, large growth in GDP, income growth, and we also saw a lot of urbanisation. So a lot more Indonesian people moving to cities and urban areas, growing by and large, which then, by analogy, I guess that means your whole food system also increases to supply that growing need for a growing socio-demographic, but also a growing urbanisation where people want to eat out more and whatnot. So that was a bit of the background to our business case, Helen, for setting up in Indonesia, and those metrics are still compelling as to this day. I think also, just as a bit of a overall comment too, just to see the rise of Indonesia as a democratic nation. I think it had a long history of colonisation, and then we've had some wars and some areas I think that went through there. Then you've had some different regimes, but actually to see the rise of this democratic republic and you know, the people, you know, looking and demanding for a new and better way of life and standard of life, and was also very, very compelling as well, which yeah, it all added up to being a very attractive investment for us.
That's terrible. You'd think I would know to unmute by now. Perhaps we should. I'd like to go to Donnie about this, you know, can investment help lower those food prices, for instance? I know that's a very broad question, but that's where we're heading to. To get to that point, Brett, can you explain to us the kind of investment that Beck has made in Indonesia?
Yeah, for sure. So look, one part of any country's development is usually the investment in what you'd call animal nutrition or animal welfare and animal health tends to follow the growth in intensive livestock. So as more mouths needed to be fed, there's a whole lot of feed systems that go behind that. We were seeing that what we call commercial feed milling, which is feeders that's produced to go into mainly intensive animals. So feedlot beef, chicken production, egg production. There is still a little bit of pig production, but I know that's a cultural sensitive issue over there. But all those factors were rising. So for us, what tends to happen too is you don't just provide feed to the animals, you actually provide much better feed, much higher quality feed, feed conversion, better welfare systems, better management systems, and a lot more investment when it comes to convincing your customers. So farmers in Indonesia, you have to spend money to make money. And that happened in Australia back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and it started to happen in Indonesia in the 90s and 2000s. So as a developing nation, you know, that was for us very compelling. We've got a lot of technical know-how in Australia, in Europe, America. You know, we've been through developing those feed systems. We've been developing the nutritional knowledge, the ability that we have to bring technology, animal welfare and management systems to help the Indonesian farmers become more productive, more knowledgeable, and also more technologically efficient.
Looking at what you have done on the ground, and Donnie, I'd like to go back to you because, you know, the report did identify the opportunities in Indonesia's agricultural sectors and the role that foreign direct investment could play. Is what Brent Antonio and his company are doing, is that a good example of that, of the kind of thing that you've uncovered?
Yes, certainly, Helen. We find a lot of examples actually that, you know, can reflect what Brett just mentioned. And a lot of these companies, they're not too, you know, loud or public. People may not realize that they're already there. A lot of Indonesians may not even know that they're related to Australian businesses, right? But not only do they bring technologies and connection to the global market, they also create employments in the global in the regions, right? And because a lot of them have very tight connection with the local communities in many ways, in like supplies and employment, in also their helping the local communities build up their businesses or even activities in general. So there are a lot of benefits that needs to be promoted. People need to know about these things, right? So FDI not only increase productivities, but also brings a lot of other benefits to the Indonesian communities.
So do you feel that there's not a strong enough conversation in Indonesia about the benefits of foreign investment? And, let's be fair, there are other countries that are very sensitive about food security as well, and who can invest in what. But looking at Indonesia, do you think that conversation is yet to happen around the benefits of it?
Yeah, that is also part of why we asked this question in this paper, right? Because especially the government has been talking about attracting foreign direct investment in many other sectors, in electronics, in things that they think can build an advanced economy. But at this stage, a lot needs to be done in the agriculture sectors as well, and people are not usually willing to do that, right? Because especially Rainer and you have mentioned a bit about the discussion about the tendency about self-sufficiency and the idea that foreigners are involved in the food system seems to be a bit hard to process for a lot of people. But here is where we come, to discuss these things, that it is actually bringing a lot of benefits. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions popping up, and I will get to them shortly. I just want to pick up on what you were saying then, Donnie, and go to Brett. Brett, what did you find? Was it a challenge to convince Indonesians, the area that you went into, the people that you wanted to work with, or the companies that you wanted to work with, that it could be a mutually beneficial arrangement and it could help the agricultural sector?
Yeah, great question. I guess it depends on the level of sophistication of the client base you're talking to, or your customer base, Helen. So if we went to a pretty advanced local or Indonesian feed mill, or a multinational that's already there, they've already got some pretty sophisticated knowledge and systems. But it was really getting to that small to medium feed mill and that small to medium size or medium to larger farm, whether it was an egg or poultry producer or whatnot. And I guess, the first response is like, oh, no, but, too expensive, cheap. And you're like, okay, you have to take them on this journey, right? So like any sales journey, you have to pitch it that it's not just about you got to spend money to make money. It's actually about how can we help you become more profitable? How can we make you more efficient? How can we help you to take better care of your animals? Because if they're less stressed or less mortality, or they're producing, you're gonna make better food, or you're gonna get a better price, or whatever it might be. So for us, we actually bolted in things called like NIR, so feed testing, nutritional knowledge. We can look at their formulation, their specifications, and we can bring worldwide best practice to their farm for no extra cost. Of course, the cost is they have to, produce byproducts that we produce. Maybe it's premix, which is vitamin mineral mixes, or feed additives, or working with a feed mill to help improve their diet. So they actually think that they're spending more, but they actually only have to use less of that feed to get a better result out of their animal. So it is a bit of a journey, and it takes a long time in Indonesia to develop trust and rapport. You have a little bit of the bule factor. So there is some assumption by the Indonesians that you already have some knowledge and some expertise, but you'd also have to prove it. So we do trials, we prove, and we do what we say. So we want to live by our word, and if they don't get the result, then okay, fair enough, don't deal with us. But 9 times out of 10, we have a really good result.
Yeah. Donnie Pasaribu, does any of that ring for you? And you might like to bring, and we have got a question here about from Philip Morey, how important is it to have a local partner to mitigate risks and manage government relationships? You might want to, oh yes, the dog's in the room, sorry. Work from home. Could you answer that as well, perhaps, Donny? Because that's sort of what Brett Antonio is touching on there.
Yeah, again, certainly, a lot of our interviews can confirm that in many different sectors, you know, but yeah, mainly we were talking about animals, especially poultry and cattle. Regarding the questions, I think it is better for me to show another slide here.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a second. So, see, this is in also in the report about cultural differences and finding a local business partner. And I have two quotes here from some of the discussions that we had earlier. So what are the three most important things to start an investment in Indonesia? There are three things. One is the right joint venture partner, the second is the right joint venture partner, and the third one is also the right joint venture partner. So it is very central to the idea of investing in Indonesia. But because this cultural sensitivity, understanding of how to deal with the regulations and everything, although people can learn right before they come to the country and invest, it is very hard, very, very hard to be able to navigate all of it without a local partner. Another quote here also confirms you have to have a fantastic local partner. If you don't, give up at the start, right? It's just the realization that there are a lot of cultural disparities between these two countries, like a lot of background, historical context, and everything else. And that is why the connection between, you know, Australians, Indonesians, or any other investors from other countries need to develop before they can successfully have a business. I'm not saying it's impossible, but from all the interviews that we did, each one of them, you know, have different stories to tell of how they meet their local partner. And that is why more interactions between these two countries are needed. And that is my answer to the question. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and one of the things that we also picked up in the report is, and you have it there, cultural awareness affects how the business is operated, its products, its interaction with employees, suppliers, consumers, the government, and the local community. You know, making and I guess having a partner isn't just about finding someone who can help you implant a business in a country. It's also knowing how to work with that partner and how to do it in a culturally sensitive way. Is that a fair comment, Brett Antonio?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm glad Donny raised the slide that he did about finding a local business partner, understanding those cultural differences. I mean, that's where a company like BizAsia comes in that can help. You know, I personally got mentoring from Greg Pankhurst before entering the market and trying to find a local business partner. And we had a couple of missteps in the early days. I'm not going to shy away from that, trying to find that right person, that right partner that you can develop your business in Indonesia. But definitely, you are definitely behind the 8 ball if you try to go alone and try and do it by yourself. There's so many cultural differences between the countries, and you know, Australia's been a bit remiss here and about building up that rapport and that understanding of Indonesia. You know, from where I sit as a business person, you know, we try to enter that market through all different channels, but as a nation, we don't seem to have a great understanding of the Indonesian people, their culture and everything. So actually going there and finding the right partner, you have to actually develop a completely different mindset on how you approach and engage with those people. And finding some good expats or some people that have lived there for a long time, and then getting to meet local Indonesian people in all sorts of level, government, semi-government, business, you name it. They're the ones that are going to give you a really good grounding to then go into the market. But it's going to be, always got taught, go there and go there often. Don't talk, ask lots of questions. and it comes back. It's a long time, but it does take a long time. That's probably another point. It does take a long time. I think that's because we don't really understand from Australia when we go to Indonesia. We don't really understand the people and the culture that well.
I can see that we've got a couple of hands raised, including Raina. Did you want to jump in there, Raina, with a thought?
Yeah, just briefly, because I do believe it's indeed crucial. And for those who might not in the audience, who might not be fully familiar with Indonesia, it's just because so many things in Indonesia are not explicit. They are not written out, or the way they are being handled is different from what you read in the regulations, etc. You can study the laws and regulations, but it's not necessarily what's happening on the ground. So that's why you need someone who's part of the local system who guides you when you want to establish yourself. But then later, even in the process as it continues, the business as it continues, you're meeting lots of new challenges, as in, for example, when you need spare parts that you want to import for your plant, etc. And every time you want to do this, you're meeting again more obstacles. So a local partner has it far easier to do all these things for you instead of always being the foreign player in the market. I just wanted to add that, Helen.
That's a good point. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think we also need to have a look at some of the real challenges that do exist. Brett, Antonio mentioned it did take longer than they expected. And these issues were raised in the report, things around regulatory uncertainty, land ownership and titles, local sensitivities. Mastoni, perhaps if I could just get an idea from you of how significant these sorts of hurdles are when it comes to investing in agriculture in Indonesia.
Yeah, it's really hard to rank which of them are more important than others, right? Because at different time, different issues can raise and they may have different importance, right? For example, the land issues is especially more important at the initial part of the business when you're looking for land, and it's really hard to find, when talking about agriculture, land is very the central of the business, right? But it's really hard to find land in Java because it's so crowded and maybe more expensive. But then when you go into the other islands, for example, it's really hard to find like in a large enough size with access to road, access to electricities, and also whether the local people are welcoming of foreign businesses, and that sort of issues arises. But then when you already start a business, regulation keep changing, and this has been a long time issue in Indonesia, especially after it becomes a democracy. I mean, it's part of it as well. From our interview, some people revealed issues such as, it keeps changing every time we have a new president, and there are new policies that we don't know what they'll, what they'll change. And this is a problem that we can't really say, there is a simple solution to this. It's just something that we need to tell the people in the government that this is a problem. Right? I'm not saying there is a quick solution to these things, but they have to know that if they want to attract investment, this is something that we need to address, right? Other issues also comes up, like institutional weaknesses at the local level. It's really hard to, deal with the local governments because they don't have the, understanding or even the capability to function fully efficiently. But it's really hard to rank them based on what is the most important or biggest issues here. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Donnie. Brett, what was your experience when it came to the regulations, to finding suitable sites? And why might this be a deterrent to others investing in Indonesia?
Wow, where do I start?
Okay, encapsulate this in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, okay, I'll do my best. Yeah, look, like Donnie said, it, it says a lot of shape shifting going on in regulatory environment. Look, we had a Dutch guy that ran a business over there for many times, married to an Indonesian. We had a lot of help from expats, had a lot of help from local Indonesian people that are in our industry. All that being said, you know, every timeline we set and every cost we set to get established as a company, get all our licenses, and really get going to the point of trading, it took 3 times as long and cost 10 times as much. So you got to be prepared for that battle Indonesia. But look, that being said, Helen, you know, we set up 2012, 2013. So the regulatory framework was a lot more inconsistent, incoherent, and a lot more difficult back in those times, let me say. You had to go to 10 different offices to get 10 different licenses. So I think Jokowi government has done a fantastic job in the last few years. The second time we set up a company, which was the production company, the first one was the sales office. That process, the one-stop shop, the online system, getting our licenses, getting our permits, that has been a lot smoother. I mean, I think they've put a lot of effort in, and that's a country, Pardoni said like it said, it had moved slow and it can do, and there's a lot of people in government which probably by design things were slow and they had a way of trying to fasten that up. But you just got to stay the course. You got to work with your local partners and your consultants and your lawyers and accountants, and you just got to push through the red tape, because, you know, the size of the prize is there. It's like, you know, it's not like you can't, from Australia where everything's very clear, black and white, a lot of the law and regulations, but you go to a country like that, there's still a lot of grey area, and you've got to be prepared for that. You have to get your mindset right.
That's great. Thanks. That very succinct answer, Brett, for a big subject. Thank you. Yeah, no, well done. A good answer, and we have got a couple of more questions in the system, and I will get to them. If you have a question, it's just probably better if you type it in for us in the chat or in the Q&A section down below, because it's a bit tricky for us to pull more people into the video part of the webinar. So just write your question in there. We're also going to have a poll just for a bit of a mid-break fun, or not quite mid-break, we've only got 15 minutes left. But we thought we'd run a short poll, and I'll just get Maika to put that up now, and you can have a look at it while I'm chatting away. You can have a go at that if you like. I did also put a note in the chat that we are recording this. That's just so that we can share it later. And also it will be available to anyone that you know who might want to watch it a bit later. So that's something that we will provide information about following the end of this webinar. And Donnie, there's a question around collusion in the marketplace, and if the report looked at that. I'll just direct your attention to it to give you a minute or two to have a look at it and see if it's something that you can answer or would like to have a go at. I guess that's one of those grey areas perhaps that Brett was just talking about. So we'll leave that poll up for you, and we'll close it just before the end of the webinar. I think, oh, there's Ika, have you got 3 polls? I think she's been very busy. So we'll just, perhaps I'll leave it to her discretion as to how many she wants to put up and in what order. All right, so Donnie, the question around collusion in the marketplace, that does come up as a concern, I guess, for particularly Western businesses who are used to operating in a different way. As Brett mentioned, it might be concerned about falling into something. And corruption is another big issue. You know, where does it exist? How do I handle it? It's a bit risky. What did your report cover any of that?
Collusion specifically, we did not really discuss, but it is related to the issues about state-owned enterprises, which tend to dominate a lot of parts of the economy in Indonesia, not just in the in food, but in food especially. There are some state-owned enterprises that dominate that. You know, it's not that they block other businesses. It's just they are so big that they control a huge part of the sector, and they are also subsidized by the government to achieve some of the self-sufficiency objectives. we see that as a problem because there is an actual evidence from our discussion, and this is not just about foreign investment, also domestic investors are troubled with this issue because they see that investing in agriculture as not profitable enough if there's already state-backed institutions that make the market unprofitable, and they influence the market quite a lot. And we address this issue in the report. However, again, we do not find a simple solution to this. It's just something that we need to mention about that this is a big problem. Of course, we try to recommend to the government that they need to lessen the influence of state-owned enterprises, but whether that is actually applicable or something that they want to do is a different topic entirely. Regarding corruption, this is something that we've discussed a bit during the interviews, and I think I mentioned a bit in the report as well. But the good thing is it's not as bad as before. As Brad mentioned, it's related to the regulatory climate as well. It's getting much better. Some interviews actually mentioned that in the past it's very hard to do clean business, like everything based on the legal standard and everything else. But today it is very much possible. So there has been a lot of improvement in this. Of course, there are progress to be made in the futures, but it has been improving. That's the point, I guess.
That's great. Thanks, Donny. There are a few more questions around that, but I'd like to keep moving because there is a little bit more to cover before we finish up, and we've got 10 minutes to go. If we can come back to that, I definitely will, because one of the things I wanted to make sure we covered here was the way forward. So if there is not enough FDI now, and we're looking at some of the constraints around that, what do the report find in terms of how to get past that and how to generate more interest between the two countries in ways that are beneficial to the food industries of both countries? And that's not just in growing or producing food, it's around manufacturing, it's around food technology, so forth and so on. Now, one of the long-held views, and this came up in the report, is that the income level of Indonesian households is too low to attract most Australian food industries into the country. The amount of investment or effort required may not be returned in the timeline within which they operate under. Donny, I'll get you to speak to that first. How, what are some ways around that? Is that correct, in fact, in your view, from what you've learned? And then, Brett, it'd be good to get your experience on that and how you factored in. I mean, you talked about rising consumption and, more people in Indonesia eating higher value foods, but how much of a consideration was, what investment level is worth it, and when do I dip out? Donny, can I go to you first?
Yeah, so it came up a few times, but it really differs between sectors. When we discuss about some high value tropical fruits, that is one of the big issues. But when we discuss about cattle and even poultry, there is a lot of there's already a huge market in Indonesia, and it's actually growing, right? And the idea of that being a barrier is actually it's declining because people are getting richer. But another important point that we need to discuss is that don't focus on the capital, on Jakarta only, because there's a huge potential in other parts of the country, especially outside Java, right? They are growing very, very quickly, and their consumption power is growing very quickly as well, right? Some of the businesses, Australian businesses in Indonesia has tapped into that opportunity. They have been very successful. And that is, what I'm saying right now is just based on our discussion, because just focusing on Jakarta will not, get you anywhere, because it's already very crowded market. And although, of course, they're much richer than the rest of the country are actually growing a bit faster than Jakarta. It's the two issues that I want to raise.
Great, thank you. Brett Antonio, do you think there is that issue that perhaps for some food industries, the level of income growth is too low at the moment for Indonesia to be of interest to them?
Yeah, I guess just hearing what Pardoni said, and maybe just slight reference to Rainer, some of his input before, particularly around productivity. Look, I've been in the market there for a while now, and I think some of the data that we looked in past just the overview stuff is, this urbanisation, and you've got areas, cities or towns that are growing rapidly, and we're seeing our customers very intrigued by the value add food component. So we've actually had customers go past egg and poultry production and have gone upstream in the food production. So owning their own restos or abattoirs to then premium food, whether it's babek, ayam, sapi, beef, duck, chicken, eggs. And my family actually come from a vertically integrated background. So we have ownership in a business here called Sunny Queen and Sun Pork, which are the biggest pork and egg integration businesses. So when I visit Indonesia, a lot of my customers are very intrigued about the value add food opportunity in Indonesia, because you have these areas where people are looking for convenience. A very young population on average too. They're looking for convenience. They're looking for value add. They're looking to spend a bit more money. They've also got families who come into wealth that want to buy, well-prepared, high-quality chicken and beef and that for their family. Then they want to have the value add, so the convenience is coming. So I see that as just saying that there's, if somebody looks at a thing and says, the average incomes are low, actually, if you break it down and look at the areas where there's fast urbanisation and incomes are growing very quick, I think you'll find that the opportunity and the potential opportunity is massive. But just to go on the point, sorry, just to labour on it, but the infrastructure really needs to catch up. So cold chain logistics is a problem. The roads and infrastructures are a problem. Getting the airport, all the things that are in that supply chain to the end consumer, that all needs some heavy investment by the government. And I know Jokowi has had a lot of policies around that the last few years, but that needs to play a fair bit of catch up.
That's a very good point too. Donnie, did your report have a look at infrastructure, supply chains? Obviously a big issue if you're going to invest in Indonesia as a food business.
Yeah, of course we discussed about that issues, especially if it's related to land and location, right? And it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's hard to find large enough land location in Java, but outside of Java, the infrastructure quality usually is not as good. But again, there has been a lot of studies on this topic in the past, so we didn't really get into it. Right, there has been indexes that are constructed, but that it also has been the focus of Indonesian government for quite a long time, and Jokowi has been doing a pretty good job in improving infrastructure quality in many parts of the country. We don't need to discuss of how he did it, but in many ways, infrastructure has been improving in Indonesia. So yes, that's a good news.
Great. I've had a late question come in, but I think I'll just see if Donnie would like to answer that online, because we're getting short of time, and I want to pose one last question to our panelists, which is a final response around how would you encourage more foreign direct investment into Indonesia? What's one step you would take? So Donnie, from your research lens, and Brett, from your Australian business lens, what's one of the first things you would do if you wanted to invest in Indonesian food or agriculture? And as I said, not necessarily just fresh produce, but thinking about technology, about manufacturing, about all the other different kinds of parts of that chain. Brett, I might go to you first, please. Just a tip, I guess. Where do you start?
Just to clarify the question, sorry, Helen, where would you start?
Where would you start if you're an Australian food manufacturer?
Yeah.
Or you had a technology that you thought might be valuable? You'd heard a lot about Indonesia. You're a bit unsure about it. How would you go about thinking, well, is this country worth investing in?
Yeah, it's that's a good question. Look,
I can do elevator music.
oh, look, I just think probably some of the references I made before, you know, look behind, work with I mean, your company can help bridge that gap. There's research papers that can help find out, you know, if you've got a very specific market, because agriculture is a big definition, right? We're in a subset of that. We're in animal nutrition and feed, but it backs off food production in Indonesia, but we can export and import there as well. But look, I think you need to look behind the data and really find out where are the consumer trends? What's the thematic behind those? What's the propensity for Indonesian people to want to demand your product, whether it's produce, fresh produce, whether it's beef, whatever it is in ag, and really know your numbers and then work back from there, because that will define what your capital is, what your risk appetite is, what resourcing you need to then enter the market, and whether you're going to find a local partner or go it alone. But you really need to understand the numbers, and it really depends on how valid and how good that research is that you can work back from. That would be my big tip.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Brett. And Donnie, of all the challenges that you found in your report, if you were looking at all those challenges, what might you think about where's a good place to start to try and overcome some of them?
So the thing is, the report is mainly written as a policy paper, right? And a lot of them are directed to the government, not to businesses to, you know, make them decisions. Of course, some of them are applicable. If I may share my screen again.
Yes, please.
So, a lot of these are, you know, for the government to improve Indonesia's situation, addressing issues about securing land, and especially in rural Indonesia's traditional solutions, including improving investment climate, infrastructure, are still very important, especially, you know, outside Java. And also the issues about, this is from the Indonesian side, self-sufficiency narrative has to be addressed, you know, because foreign investment can actually help to achieve self-sufficiency. We're saying that they need to do that, but it's actually some little point that there is no clash here. Even if it's realistic, it tends to be very expensive, and it harms the consumers. And about regulation, I already mentioned earlier, we need fewer restrictions, lower complexity, and higher consistency. Right? Everyone has been talking about this for a long time, but, you know, of course, there are a little progress lately about omnibus law. I saw a question about it earlier, you know, less restrictions in investment in Indonesia quite recently, but still a lot of people are still asking questions about certainty. Are they going to change again in the future? Now it looks like it is relatively open, but will it be consistent? How about 5 years from now? And the dominance of the state-owned enterprises needs to be reduced. I've discussed about it earlier. And yeah, predictability is very important. You know, going back to what Brett mentioned earlier, there are, of course, so many different experiences that, you know, we can discuss here. But some of the message that I gathered from them about doing business in Indonesia is a lot of them tend to start small, right? They don't just build a huge thing in Indonesia and expect a great return. They need to get acquainted to the market to understand how it works in Indonesia, right? And finding a local partner is a huge part of it. And one way that we find is it's potentially good in this is about you know, increasing Indonesian people working in Australia. In the report, we discuss a bit about work and holiday visa, right? The quota has been increased from 1,000 per year, I believe, to 4,000 because of IACPA agreement. But because of COVID, it hasn't been, you know, hasn't started yet. But in the future, some of the people that I interviewed even suggest we should increase it to 10,000 people per year. That way, there are a lot more interactions. There are more opportunities so that people can see, oh, we can do this in Indonesia as well. That brings investment. And this interaction is very important. And there are many different ways for people to find a local business partner, but there has to be some level of trust, right? And that is why this is important to build. Another thing is to, again, this is related to Brett's point earlier, to understand what the consumers want in Indonesia. Because a lot of the things that we find unimportant here in Australia are actually valuable in Indonesia, like chicken feet, for example, right? In Indonesia, I wouldn't say huge, but a lot of people want to eat chicken feet, right? And other parts of the animal, that are not sellable in Australia. Apparently, some of those investors see this as an opportunity that they can, we can make profit out of those things. We didn't think about that before, but it means less waste, more profit. Then, these kind of things, you need to actually understand the culture. You need to understand the people to be able to tap into this opportunity. Okay, I guess that's
yeah. Well answered to my roundabout question. That's great. Thank you, Donnie. What are the challenges and how do we address them? So that's excellent. Thank you. We'll have to leave it there. I've noticed we're a little bit over time, so thank you for sticking with us. It was good to get that final summary, though, from the two speakers. We'll just quickly pop up the results of those two polls that you kindly took part in. How much did you know about FDI in Indonesian agriculture? Yeah, even I reckon I'd be in a little phase, and I would live there for 4 years. So it's a complex area. So it's great to have this report done by CIPS. And was there another one? The producer, Mbak backstage. Can't see her, but we can see her. Oh, yes, there she's doing all the work. How important is it for Australian and Indonesian companies to work together on food production? Well, hopefully now everyone's going to tick very important. Thank you for doing that. I'd like to thank you for joining us. I noticed that there were some questions in the Q&A which we didn't get to, so we've made a copy of those. And I think what we'll try and do is get back to people. I'll work with CIPS on that, get back to people and provide answers where we can. We appreciate that you took the time to write those in, and we'll see if we can respond adequately to them. Thank you for joining us for today's session, and I'd like to thank our two panelists, Donnie Pasaribu, Associate Researcher with the Centre for Indonesian Policy Studies. Thank you very much, Donnie. Lovely to see you. And to Brett Antonio, the Managing Director of Beck Feed Solutions, who are just so great to have you join our discussion, Brett, and to share your experience and insight. Thank you.
Kembali, Bu Helen. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, yeah. And Raina Heppers, the Executive Director of CIPS based in Jakarta. Always lovely to catch up with you, Raina. Thank you for driving the research that the CIPS Institute does.
Thank you for moderating the discussion so well. Pleasure.
All right, my pleasure. As always, get in touch with us if you have any further questions. As I said, we'll try and get back to you. We'll send out a link to the recording in case you'd like to see that. And there was one more thing and it's just escaped my attention. Hopefully we will see you next time that we have a discussion on something related to Indonesia and Australia. I'll leave you for now. Thank you.